Moving on to module 2. In this module, you decide your gender. Here we'll discuss what exactly is gender identity and how is it different from sex assigned at birth. We'll also delve deeper into some commonly heard terms such as cisgender, transgender, the trans umbrella, which comprises of binary and non-binary identities, gender euphoria, gender dysphoria, and also we'll answer a question that a lot of people often wonder about, which is what exactly are pronouns and what is the big deal about them. One very important thing for you to remember is that a person's sex assigned at birth has nothing to do with their gender identity. A person's gender identity is their own internal experience, their own internal sense of their gender. It is whatever they say that it is. Now, a person's gender identity can be a man, it can be that of a woman, it can be that of a non-binary person, it can be that of a genderqueer person, it can be that of an agender. Okay, calm down. We don't have to get confused. We'll go step by step. So like I said, a person's gender identity may actually be informed by the sex that they've been assigned at birth, while it is very different from it. Let me explain this a little. So if a person has been assigned female at birth, they would be socialized as a girl, which means the kind of dresses that they're bought, the kind of toys that they're given to play with, the kind of school that they're sent to, the kind of activities that they're allowed to engage in, so on and so forth. And similarly, if a person has been assigned male at birth, they would be socialized as a boy. So yes, it is informed a little by the sex assigned at birth, but correlation is not causation. A person forms their gender identity based on how they feel on the inside. It could have a little to do with their hormones, it could have to do with their genetic makeup, it could also just have to do with a general sense of how they're relating with their body and how they're relating with the world. Now, a person who does not identify with the sex that they've been assigned at birth is called a transgender person, and a person who does identify with the sex that they've been assigned at birth, which means the sex assigned at birth actually corresponds to their gender identity, they're called a cisgender person. So basically, a person who was assigned male at birth and identifies as a man is a cisgender man. A person who's been assigned female at birth and identifies as a man is a transgender man. In our society, cisgender people are considered the default and trans people are considered outliers. But what does cis even mean? What does it mean to be cis? Does all forms of femininity or masculinity come naturally to you? If you are a cis woman, think about it. Have you ever been slut-shamed for the clothes that you wear? Have you ever been told that you're too much or too little, or that you have too much body hair, or that you're not pretty enough, or you're carrying too much weight in certain parts of your body, or you're not carrying enough weight in certain other parts of your body? And if you're a cis man, think about the occasions where you felt compelled to pay for a date, despite maybe being broke. Or have you felt like you cannot express your emotions at all? You cannot cry, maybe you can't go and help out in the kitchen, and you have to perform a certain kind of masculinity. So this idea of cisness in itself is to be questioned. So how do you actually know that you're a cis person? How do you actually know that you're a cis woman or a cis man, even though you don't meet all the parameters and all the societal rules that are set as to what it means to be a masculine man and a feminine woman, right? Self-determination. What is self-determination? Well, self-determination simply means that you are whatever you say you are, you like whatever you say that you like, nobody is allowed to question it, and you get to determine your own experience. It can be as simple as, hey, do you like ice cream or don't you? Do you like to go out in the winters or do you like to stay cuddled at home? So if you can determine these more minor experiences, day-to-day experiences of your life, then why can't you determine the larger parts of your identity? So just like you have a right to determine your own cis identity, a trans person has a right to self-determination as well. They have a right to determine their own identity, and they are trans simply because they say they are. They don't need to prove it to you. They don't need to get certificates from doctors or lawyers in order to prove that they are actually trans. And we must not actually question a person's gender identity because it is so personal to them. And there are some trans people who might not really identify with the label trans. They may just want to be called a man or a woman. And why should we have a problem with that? Think about it like this. If I were to ask you to introduce yourself, you're not going to begin with your gender identity. You'll probably talk about your interests, you'll talk about your achievements, you'll talk about your hobbies, where you like to go, what you like to eat, maybe even your favorite actor and actress before you actually talk about your gender identity, if at all. So a trans person's gender identity need not be the be-all and end-all of their entire identity. It may just be a minuscule part of their overall being. As per the Indian law, there are 3 legally defined identities: man, woman, and the third gender. Now, this is so problematic. If there is such a thing as third gender, what is the first gender and what is the second gender? This creates a hierarchy which obviously we do not want, and it's actually constitutionally illegal to have this kind of hierarchy within genders because the constitution bans any forms of discrimination or hierarchy based on a person's gender. Now, within our socio-cultural contexts, there are communities such as Kinnars, Jogtis, Hijras, who are often confused with being trans. Now, not all people from these communities identify as trans, and not all trans people actually belong to these identities. Transness is a very expansive experience, and it contains a horde of other identities within its umbrella, and we're going to get a little bit more into it. What do I mean when I say that trans is an umbrella term? Well, it means that it contains a horde of other identities such as binary identities, which means man and woman. So a trans man or a trans woman would be a binary trans person, and it also contains non-binary identities which may fall in between or beyond these binary identities of man and woman. Let me give you a couple of examples. So gender fluid people are considered non-binary trans people. So a gender fluid person does not have a very static relationship with their gender. Their gender evolves over time, and it can also be fluid in nature. It's not dynamic or fixed, unlike some other people who might experience their gender identity in a more fixed and defined format. There are also agender people who may have no relationship with their gender, who might not really have any gender at all. So there are identities which don't necessarily fall into these boxes of man and woman, even within this idea of transness. Some trans people might experience an incongruence with the gender that is being imposed on them based on the sex that they've been assigned at birth. You know, like typically when a person is assigned male at birth, they are raised as a man, and the expectations on them are that they behave like a man and they go about their day-to-day life like a man would, in a masculine manner. So some trans people might not feel comfortable to perform those kinds of roles, and may, as a result of that, experience a disconnect with their body, might experience a disconnect with the way that they're being perceived, might not like the name or pronouns that people are using for them, and might experience a lot of hurt and mental trauma because of this. This is known as gender dysphoria. Some trans people might actually feel euphoric when they're being identified with the right name, with the right pronouns, or they're allowed to dress in a manner that aligns with their experience of their gender, or have a hairstyle that suits their gender identity better, and that is known as gender euphoria. For some trans people, their experiences of gender dysphoria or gender euphoria might come with them medically transitioning. Now, this is through gender-affirming surgery, which can be by way of hormone replacement therapy, it can be by way of top surgery or bottom surgery, or facial feminization or masculization surgeries, and so on. So a person might choose to medically transition, and a person might also just choose to socially transition by way of coming out to their friends and family, or closed circle, or even at work, even in certain places that feel safe to them. They might present more masculine or feminine in those spaces. They might wear their hair in a different way. They might wear a certain set of clothes. They might wear different kinds of accessories, and might also go by different names and pronouns in these spaces or in all spaces. Not all trans people choose to medically transition, and not all trans people can even afford to medically transition. In fact, the amount of gatekeeping and the amount of bureaucracy that is actually involved in medically transitioning is beyond our wildest imaginations. And it also requires a fair amount of monetary and even time and energy investment on part of a person, which not all trans people are able to afford, and maybe some trans people might actually choose to not undergo medical transition because of all these barriers. So the surgery of a trans person and them transitioning in a way that we understand should not be the benchmark of whether or not we actually respect a person's trans identity, or whether or not we actually respect their chosen name and pronouns. Dead naming is when we intentionally choose to use the name that a trans person was, let's say, given at birth, and they actually feel a deep disconnect from that they actually don't really connect with. And that is a very violent transphobic act that one can commit. Even misgendering a person by way of their pronouns is something that one must absolutely avoid at all costs. And it's as simple as asking someone their name. So just when you look at me, you're not going to assume that my name is Jessica because I look like a Jessica. You're going to come and ask me what my name is. So similarly, it's important for us to not assume a person's pronouns and simply ask them what their pronouns is, and if they're comfortable sharing it with you, they will. And we can always resort to the default they/them pronouns, which is a more gender neutral pronoun. We will discuss a little bit more about pronouns and how they're very important to a person's identity, whether they are cis or trans. Simple changes that one makes in language can actually have a huge impact on people's lives. For example, using the right pronouns can actually make a person feel euphoric about their gender. Now, what are pronouns? Pronouns have nothing to do with a person's gender. They're simply words that replace the nouns in a sentence. So instead of saying, Apurupa is doing such a great job of explaining gender, you can use my pronouns she or they. You can say she is doing a great job of explaining gender, or you can say they are doing a great job of explaining gender. This can be a little difficult, especially when we're just starting out on understanding gender identities beyond our own identity. So what can one do? Two simple things. One, always introduce yourself with your name and your pronouns. This will create a safe space for other people to introduce their pronouns as well if they're comfortable doing so. Second, if you happen to misgender someone, if you happen to use the wrong pronouns and they correct you, simply say thank you and move on. Make sure that you are mindful the next time around, and don't make this about yourself and don't create a scene there, drawing more attention to the situation. Remember that the person is at the center of the experience, and this is not about you. And different languages have different gender neutral terms that one can use for people. I remember an instance where I was doing a workshop in a college, and I just happened to say ladies and gentlemen when I was welcoming people to the workshop. A person walked up to me at the end of the workshop and they confided in me and said how when I said ladies and gentlemen because they identify as non-binary, they didn't feel represented. They didn't feel like the session was catered to them, and they also felt like I wasn't really seeing people outside of the binaries. So what did I do? I apologized. I made sure that in future sessions I used more gender neutral terms such as folks or people, or even saying something like good morning sunshines can work as gender neutral. Remember that terms like guys and dudes, which have now become a part of gender neutral parlance, might actually trigger dysphoria in some people. So always defer to a trans person when you are trying to make decisions around what kind of language to use, what terms to use. Just because you think that something is gender neutral and something is affirming doesn't mean that it is. Just like a person's sex assigned at birth is not equal to their gender identity, remember that a person's gender identity does not have to correspond with traditional gender norms and ideas about what a person's gender expression should be or should not be. For example, there is this notion that men shouldn't wear dresses or women shouldn't wear their hair short. So these are essentially the traditional ways in which society views gender expression. But a person's gender expression can be motivated by something else entirely. It could have to do with their gender identity, it could have to do with their sexuality, it could have to do with, something they do for fun. It could, maybe they just like to wear a certain kind of outfit at parties or at social gatherings, or even in bedroom situation. It could even have to do with convenience. Maybe it's a really hot day and a person wants to wear a skirt instead of a pant. Now, a person's gender expression can change from day to day, it can change from setting to setting, and it can also change based on convenience, like I just said. A person's gender expression might be motivated by a need to express their gender identity. Like I was saying previously, a trans person may choose to socially transition by changing the way that they are outwardly appearing, by dressing differently, by wearing their hair differently, by their mannerisms, and so on. Or it could have nothing to do with that. It could be completely unintended. It may just be showing up in the way that a person talks or expresses themselves or just occupies space in general. So remember that a person's gender identity and gender expression are two completely different things. And while the society demands that we somehow bring in a sort of alignment between the two, it's not necessary for us to do that. So whether you identify as cis or whether you identify as trans, wear whatever you want to, express yourself however you want to, and act however you want to, as long as you're not crossing other people's boundaries and you're cognizant of your own boundaries, you can express your gender in any manner.